ever did with the Powell Company was a setter on the carriage, and I not only set in their mill, the one at Lost Creek, but Elmer Horton would pick me up and take me out to these different mills, like at Violin Lake, because he wasn't satisfied with the grade of lumber that was coming out, and he wanted a setter to go in there and work on it.
But were you born in Nelson?
I was born in New Denver.
In New Denver. When did you come to Nelson?
Well, let's see. I left New Denver in 1909. Went to England. Came back from England in 1918. And
did you come here?
And I came here then, and I went to the Bird's Eye Mine in. I went to Central School for a year. And in 1920, I went up to the Bird's Eye Mine on a part-time basis, and still went to school. And then in 21, I started in the sawmills around, and I worked the different sawmills. Those days, you never had to worry about a job. You could walk out of this sawmill and walk down the road to the next sawmill, and they'd give you a job.
Were there quite a few sawmills along
lots
the
of
water?
sawmills, lots of sawmills, all the way between here and Salmo, up the Slocan Valley, all the way up to Casville. Little mills. Not some were portable, but most of them were stationary mills. But they turn out 25, 30,000 foot a day. That one at Lost Creek used to turn out between anywhere from 45 to 55,000. The one in the Lardeau, they turned out about the same amount.
The one at Lardeau, or the one up in Meadow Creek?
And there's another one. There was one in Lardeau, and that was the man who had the one in Lardeau. If I aren't mistaken, his name was Severin. And now Newcomen was up in Meadow Creek.
Right. Well, were most of these mills steam powered with boilers that burned the slab from them?
Yeah, most of them. Most of them were, as far as that's concerned. But they all had some of them were, some of the portables mostly were had gas engines that were running them. The big ones had the steam power, as far as that's concerned, and they were all. The carriages were all cable, run by cable. It was quite a long time after that before they come in with the shotgun feed and the niggers and things like that. Before they just had a man with a cant hook. He was the nigger.
So how long did you work?
I worked in the sawmills from around 21 to about 25. Yes, about from 21 to about 25, and then I went into the mines for a little while, and I did do a little logging in between there, but I quit entirely. 1928 was the last time, and I worked for Johnson and Johnson Sawmill down here, right by the site of WW Powell Company. There was a sawmill right there, run by, not Eli Johnson, what was his name? I can't think of his first name.
This was Johnson and Burns?
No, this was another Johnson. No, I can't think of his name right now. But I worked for him in 1928, and it was the fall of 1928, and that's the last I did anything with mining or logging.
And then what did you do?
Then I went to work for Beatty Brothers, and I worked for Beatty Brothers from then till 1939.
What was your job there?
I was salesman, and I started in Trail and came here for a little while, and then they needed a crew manager up there in the East Kootenays, and I went to the East Kootenays. And I had 3 or 4 men working on me up and through there, and I stayed right through there until war was declared.
So you had managed to switch jobs right before the Depression and then hold on to your job.
Right.
You must have.
That's right.
Huh.
And then when the war was declared, a lot of these companies went out of business. Well, some of them did go out of business, as far as that's concerned, but a lot of them just quit production because they couldn't get the stuff to go along. And I went from, I was in Cranbrook then, and I came from Cranbrook to Nelson, and Beatty Brothers had a store here at that time, and they had a fellow running the service department, Ken Skillen was his name, Ken Skillen. And then Mac and Mac had taken over Beatty Brothers, and Frigidaire, and I don't know what else. They took over an awful lot. And I got called to go to Vancouver. They wanted us to work in Vancouver. And so they took us down to Vancouver there. And I don't know why, because we didn't do anything. Sit around, drew our money, that's all. It was the most useless thing I ever seen in my life. And then Beatty Brothers, in the meantime, had produced quite a lot of washing machines, and they were going to spread this bunch out. And there was a carload being sent to Nelson here. And I came in from Vancouver to Nelson. The store was still open, and the serviceman was still servicing what was there. And I sat down, got on the phone there, and I just sold the whole carload right on from my desk right there. I just phoned up, Trites Woods, Fernie, Trites Woods, Michelle, Kimberly Hardware, J.D. McBride, what's the name, Miller and Grand Forks. I've just forgot them all now. Just sold. How many washers do you want?
What year was that?
That was in 1940. And then Mac and Mac took me back to close the store here. I went back to Vancouver, and they were having trouble in Trail with the A.B. Webster Hardware, and they sent me from there to the A.B. Webster Hardware, and then at that time, the people were having trouble with appliances. There was no appliance store or repair store for appliances, everything like that. But this hardware store had quite a shop at the back that could be turned in, and I turned it into a repair shop for anyone, not only Beatty, but anything that and what parts I couldn't get, I used to phone up the hill, up to Kamenko, and tell them, and they would send a man down and pick up any parts I needed, the line of gears and everything, make them at the machine shop and send them back again. And they charged me nothing, and I charged the customer nothing, except for labor. And we worked sometimes at 10, 11 o'clock at night, repairing old machines, everything under the sun. And we did that right along until Jack Greenwood came into the picture. And Jack Greenwood wanted to start a hardware here, and they got the place just built up. And he went to Mac and Mac recommended me to manage the store. So I came from Trail to Nelson to take over to Greenwood's Hardware. And then, of course, he sold back to Mac and Mac, and I got landed up with Mac and Mac again. Then I quit. Well, I didn't quit right off the bat. I bought fellow named Stenson, Reggie Stenson and I, we bought the Salmo hardware. And Reggie and I went out there. Reggie went out right away, and I still kept managing this one while I was waiting for a man to take my place. And every Wednesday afternoon I'd drive out to Salmo and help Reggie out there and price goods, put stuff on the shelves and things like that. And then times were good then, because all the mines were working. Salmo Con, Reeves McDonald, HB, the Queen. What else was working out there? There was quite a lot working out there.
Was that at the end of the 40s?
That was the end. That was at the end of the 40s, right, and getting into the 50s, and then we seen the writing on the wall because the mines were starting to close down, and so we sold everything out and got out of it, and I went to work for Crown Life Insurance. I've been with them ever since. Came back in here, yeah.
Did you start your own insurance agency?
No, I work for Crown Life.
For Crown
Yeah.
Life,
Yeah. And that's, but I said it's, I enjoyed every bit of it. And I say the sawmills I worked in there, was a good bunch. The mines I worked in. As I say, never had to worry about a job, all kinds of jobs.
How old were you in 1921 when you went to work at the sawmill?
I was 15.
50.
Yeah.
So you were a bit underaged.
A little bit underage.
Would there have been other boys your age working in the mill?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
You didn't want to continue with school?
No, things just weren't right the way I wanted it, so I thought it'd be better off to work, and I took, for the next few years I took correspondence courses on different things, and did a lot of reading and things like that. You get stuck out in a camp, and there's nothing else to do, but so I'd take a correspondence course and go through with it, and surprise what you can learn.
What was your first sawmill job?
My first sawmill job was a dogger, working on the other end of the setter. And I think I lasted 3 days on that, and I was setting. Wasn't going to keep me on the end there.
Can you describe the job of setter to me a bit?
Yeah, I can. A setter, all the time we were there, on those on the take the Lost Creek one for one, that was quite a fast carriage. It was quite fast. If you had a good sawyer, you don't worry at all. If you had a sawyer that would jerk, well, he's allowed to kick the feet out from under you, as far as that's concerned. But they used to put 2 blocks on the carriage, just like that, so that your feet couldn't slip, you see. And you had a set worker to marking up 1 inch or 2 inches or whatever you wanted to do, everything like that. And you had a dog which hooked into the log. And on the other end you had a dogger working. And he had 2 to look after. And when the man turned the cant, you slipped in your dogs to hold it. You know? And
how were the cants turned? I mean, they would roll the logs onto the carriage.
That's right.
With gravity usually.
Well, the deck was down, not very much, just enough so that it made it easy to roll. You couldn't have it too much or it'd come down on the carriage too fast.
So you and the dogger would together roll the log on?
There was a man sitting on the deck. He turned the cants. You see, but the
so you're actually on the other side of the log.
That's right.
Yeah.
and he was on that side. But the dogger also had a little cant hook, that if there's a big log there, that he'd throw his cant hook in, and he'd pull as the other one pushed, and threw the dog in.
Okay. There were usually 3 dogs.
3 dogs, yes. There's 3 on the carriage. There's 2 close together like that, then one's quite farther apart, and that is on those. So then there's smaller mills where they only just had the 2 dogs, one on each end, and most of those were set with the sawyer used to do his own setting, you see, and he'd just reach over. There was a long handle, and he'd reach over and set it. That's what he would do. But up there, you cut more lumber if you've got a man who's right on there who knows when he's through the saw, while he sits right up and he's back in again. You see, some of those saws are good. They don't come out of that saw more than that. That's all, and they're right back in again. That Dory who sawed up at Salmo, he was fast. He was good and he was fast.
What was his name?
Fred Dory.
Fred Dory.
Yeah, his son is Willie Dory. Runs Marathon Motors out in Sawmill right now.
Uh-huh.
Willie, I had Willie dogging for me after, but he didn't like it.
When you worked for Powell, you were cutting match planks?
Mostly all white pine. Matchstock is all white pine. That's all, and that's what it was. And that's all they cut up at Lost Creek. Nothing else but white pine.
Would they cut other species? And
no.
Then
when they logged nothing but the white pine. All the rest of it was left. The hemlock and the cedar up and through there was all left in there. It was never taken out at all. But up at here up at Lardeau, they were taking everything along. In fact, Powell were trying to get, there was a stand of white pine up at Haley's Landing, right back up in there. I think around about 11 or 12 million feet of white pine up in through there. They never got it. But
who had it?
I don't know who had it. I couldn't answer that question. But it was up there.
Kootenay cedar, perhaps.
Pardon?
Kootenay cedar?
It could have been Kootenay cedar. I don't know. But I know that Powell did try to get it. And they did talk. If they got it, they would put a portable up in there. But it never came through, as far as that's concerned. And then Violin Lake, that there they cut everything. But there was a lot of white pine coming in. There was more white pine than anything else up there at Violin Lake. And,
when you were cutting for the match planks, how can you describe how you would set up the cut? You would take slabs off first.
Yeah, you take the first slab off. You see, on ordinary cutting, you're cutting 1 inch or 2 inch. That's all you cut, unless you're on a special cut where you're working on a lot of good logs that are clear, and you've got a special order in, where maybe you're cutting what they call 5/4 or 6/4, and you've got to come out to the dog log, the dog plank, which on white pine is 2 1/8. Because that's your matchstock. It's 2 1/8, not 2 inches. It's 2 1/8. Right? So you get a log. It comes up there, and you know from your dial on there just what you've got there, and you just have to look and see. Right off the bat, you can look and say, well, I can get 4 2 1/8 off of that one. You see. Because you've got 2 1/8, and you've got 1/4 inch of a saw cut.
So in your mind, you were adding up all these.
That's right. You've got to add. So you're working at not 2 1/8. You're working at 2 3/8. You see, and then maybe you find you can get a nice 1 inch off the first. You can get the first there, and then 1 inch, and then. So sometimes the slab that comes off is a little bigger than some slabs come off there quite small. The next slab is quite a lot bigger. But to come in, you've got to come out to the plank that is on on those dogs. Otherwise, you're allowed to have your saw cutting into your dogs.
And you've wasted the last piece.
And you've also wasted the last piece on top of that, and that'll never do it. You know?
Is that all that they wanted, or did they also have other white pine products?
They had as I said, we'd get orders coming in for thousands of feet of clear 5 inch and a quarter, inch and a half, and so you'd have to watch if you got a good log, and it was as clear as a bell. You can't see when the first slab comes off. The sawyer can see what's in there, and he signals you just what it is. It's clear. So you know you're cut an inch and a quarter, inch and a half. So you start right off take that off. See? And now, if such a thing as you made one cut, and there before you made the turn on it, then he would signal you again, and you'd go back to the regular, as far as that's concerned. Now, when you make the turn, you'd keep on your regular, but that's it. You get used to the signals from the sawyer, or what you want and what he doesn't want, and things like that.
So because you're on the back side.
I'm on the back side, so you have to rely on you have to watch your sawyer all the time. You see. As far as that goes. And then of course you get a big log, a real big log. Then they take and just cut the slab, and then they drop it down on the slab. Then they cut it that way.
I didn't catch that.
Oh, okay. The round log. Say that we had a 2-foot log, all the way along, and it's too hard to turn it up and cut it straight through. So you take off a slab, and maybe you say we'll take off a 2 1/8, and then we drop it down onto the flat. Okay. Then we take that next cut off and run through there, and then it's turned again, and that's put up against it, and then you come back the other way. That's to make it easy, because it's too much for one man to turn with a cant on like that, as far as that's concerned. But you get so used to it, you know, that you know in a minute what you're going to do pretty well. And the man turning cants knows just about the same thing, because he's watching the sawyer.
There'd be 4 of you.
Yeah, there's the dogger, a setter, the man turning cants, and the sawyer.
And then on the other end.
On the other end, then it goes, when it drops off from the carriage, it goes to the edger. And you've got an edgerman. You see? Now, we had the edgerman up in Lost Creek, all the times I was, the name of Jim Hess. A heck of a good edgerman, you see. Then it went through there, and then it went through it to the trimmers. And then from the trimmers, it went out there and ready to go down. It was all was taken down to Salmo and piled in a big yard down in Salmo, where the lumber was.
This is it from Lost Creek.
Yeah. How
did the wood get into the mill at Lost Creek? How did it get from the woods to the mill site?
Well, they were logging up and through there. There was it was all horse logging those days. Every bit was horse logging, and some of it on one side there, they'd bring the logs down and they were decked, but up on the other side there, they had a flume, and it wasn't water at all. It was just set up with block they were hemlock logs set in there and smoothed, and they greased them.
So it was a chute.
Yeah, it was a chute. And believe me, they used to come down there too. But that's what it was. And they let it go right into the pond.
Did the people in the woods work for Powell?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. It was.
They weren't contractors.
Oh no. It was a straight Powell do, as far as that's concerned. The bush foreman was a fellow named Alec McGregor, and he lived up on the mountain station out there and his son. I don't know whether I know old Alec is dead, but I don't know whether young Alec is still living now or not. He went into the woods too, to work with his dad. But he was the bush foreman up there at that time. I can remember a few of them. And the millwright was Ira Tomba. Mrs. Tomba still lives in Sawmill. And the youngest boy, I can't think of his first name now either, but he's in Salmo.
You had a millwright there to keep things running.
Oh yeah, Ira Tomba was the millwright. And we had Gage Campbell was the blacksmith. He did the blacksmithing up there, and of course that was shoeing horses and everything else as far as that's concerned.
And then how would you get the lumber from the mill to Salmo?
The mill went down, and they had 3 trucks. Now these were hauled by I can't think of the man who had the trucks. He had 3 trucks. He had a Federal, which is I got a picture of, a Kelly Springfield, and a Leyland. And those trucks, the Kelly Springfield would take around about 4,500 square feet of long. The Federal would take that about 45. The Kelly Springfield would take about 5,500, but the old Leyland would take around about 7,500. And they were all hard tires.
Well, there must have been quite a ride.
It was quite a ride.
Did you drive trucks at all?
I drove one. I drove that. I drove every one of those trucks, but not at a steady basis. But I have driven every one of those trucks there. I've spared up, and in the fall when the mill wasn't running, we did a little work on that, and we'd help out on different things like that. So.
What was the season for sawmilling and logging?
Oh, yeah.
When would you arrive at the mill to go to work?
Oh, around about April, I guess. It was somewhere around about April that we'd get going.
When you arrived there, had the logging crews been at work for a while, and was there a stockpile of logs?
Oh, there was logs ready to go. Yeah.
So they have been working?
They had been working. Some of them worked all winter. Yeah, some worked all winter and got up, and then they started to move them out. And we'd work through till October, end of October, something like that.
Would they be logging all that time as well?
Not so much in the summer. No, they did most of the logging in the winter.
And you would saw until October?
Yeah, we'd go till about October is where we'd go then, as far as that's concerned. And a couple of winters I went in the bush. I went in sawing. I went in with a deaf and dumb fella. Hustaway his name was. We used to call him the dummy. He was deaf and dumb. He was a good sawyer though.
What was his name?
Hustaway. Francis Hustaway. His father owned the mechanics garage in Calgary. But he was a good logger. As far as falling timber, of course, without there was we had the long saws, 2 men on a saw. Wasn't any power chain or chainsaws or power saws or anything like that those days.
And you were falling white pine for Powell?
And we falled for Powell, and then one winter we went up to the Watchan Lake for Waldie's, and we stayed the whole winter up there, and cut logs up in through there.
Was he older than you were, or were you?
Yes, he was. He would be, I imagine, about 10 years older than me. 8, 10 years older than me, something like that. But he was an awful nice fella.
How did you work with someone falling who couldn't hear you?
That's quite a question, but it's amazing, when you're you've got your tree, you've got your undercut in that tree, and you start on the other side, and he for some reason or other, his eyes just didn't miss anything. you know, and he was sawing away, and all of a sudden his hands are on the other side, and his fingers are going.
Signaling to you.
Yeah.
So he couldn't talk to you.
Oh no, he couldn't talk, and he told.
But did you develop a friendship?
Oh yes, oh yes. After he quit the logging too, and he went to work in Calgary for an electrical company wiring electrical motors. And I went to Calgary a couple of times, and I went in to see him, and he was doing very, very good.
So you had signals for what you needed to work out in the fall.
That's right. You had signals, what you had.
So the summer you would be a setter, and the winters you were on the other end of a crosscut saw.
Well, I could also edge it too, as far as that's concerned. I did both down here for Johnson. I edged part of the year, then set part of the year. They ran out of a edgerman, so I took it on. So, but most of it was I was setting. I set most. I set up at Lardeau, and the sawyer up there was a fellow named Galbraith. Another good sawyer. Good sawyer. I had some good sawyers, real good sawyers.
What was a bad sawyer?
Well, I'll tell you, a bad sawyer was up at Corbin. I went up there for, I can't think of the name of the outfit now. It was a big outfit too. It was a big mill. It was a single cup band, and that's the first time I'd worked on a band. I'd worked on the double big one saw above the other,
yes,
but never on a band. And I went up there, and there was three brothers. There was Louis Rear was the mill foreman, and John Rear was the boss overall, and Wild Bill Rear was the sawyer, and he had the name Wild Bill. Boy, I'm telling you, he shot that carriage back to it, and it was gunshot feed, and it had a nigger, you know, and boy, he just flattened that down. He'd slam that nigger right against the log and jam it on the carriage there, and it's gone. And he came back, zoom, and he's wrapped.
Didn't give you too much time to do your sums.
Oh, I tell you, he was glad. There's two setters on the carriage though. We only went on 2.5 hours, and then we go and dog. The other man went on to the next two. It was 10-hour shifts, is what they were. And the other setter who would work with me up there was St. Denis. I don't know whether you remember the St. Denises that were here. Well, this was an uncle of the St. Denises that were here. But so many that I worked with, they've all passed on right now. Gee, I was trying to think the last 2 or 3 days, trying to think. I went through the bunch out at Salmo there, and I can't remember any that worked in some of those. Just can't remember who's left up as far as that's concerned.
If you were down on the waterfront at Johnson's, they would be at the extreme far end.
No, they were this side of
this side of Powell.
This side of Powell.
Was Powell the last mill?
Powell was the last one, then Johnson's, and then the veneer factory was next, and then past the veneer factory used to be Kenny and Crusher, Western Box and Shingle Mills. And that's a long time ago. That's back in the 20s.
Sure.
Early 20s.
And Nelson, the planing mill, was that?
They had a planing mill there. They had they had everything in the line of they made apple boxes and everything. It was all wet. They were all put out on the. They had a great big platform, and they had kids going out there laying them this way so they'd get dry, and all the different sizes. But they had a little sawmill.
Was that at the foot of Cedar Street or the foot of Hall Street?
Where would it be right now? Gosh, I've got to stop and think.
At one time...
Well, it must been at the foot of Fall, because it was very close to the hospital. The hospital was right above us at that time, because I know there was one fella cut his fingers off, and we rushed him up to the hospital. And we went straight up the hill. That's when the old hospital was down here, where that High Street apartment is going.
But in between, there used to be a very large sawmill there at one time, wasn't there?
Oh, that was years and years before my time too.
And that was all gone?
That's all gone. Yeah, that's right.
And then if you continued along the waterfront this way, past there, past where the mall is and Lakeside Park, and you come around the corner to where KFP was.
Yeah, Kootenay Forest.
What was there in the 20s?
Nothing more than just a waterfront.
Was there was it Katy or
no, Katy was
Schaefer Hitchcock?
No,
that was later.
That'd been later. But the first mill to go down there was the one that they took out of Lost Creek. That was the Lost Creek mill that went down here.
Powell sold the mill?
Well, I don't know who sold it, but that mill was taken out and put down here to Kootenay Forest, and ran for quite a long time, just as it was. And then they pulled out the old carriage and put in gunshot feed and a nigger, but it's still the same mill.
That was the first time that there was a sawmill of any kind?
Right there, as far as I can remember, yes.
Do you know what year that was?
When they put that in there, it must have been, oh gee, I don't know. The last time that Powell ran up there at Lost Creek was 25, and it sat there for a few years before it was moved, so it was just close to the 30s, 1930, when they moved it down there.
When would the Lost Creek mill have been started by Powell?
It was built in the winter of 23-24. Is when they built that. A fellow named Bert Witzel built the mill.
So it wouldn't have operated for very long.
2 years.
Up there.
That's all it did. 2 years.
Would that have been profitable for them? 2
Well,
years?
they got the white pine, what they were after.
How much of the white pine that they needed for their whole operation came from their own sawmills, and how much came from these other sawmills?
Oh, I would say at least 50-50. I would say.
And what kind of arrangements did they have with these smaller sawmills? Did they place orders with them?
Most of them, those small ones, most of it was all matchstock. Nothing else but matchstock they got from these other ones, is what it was, as far as that's concerned. Or there was some inch boards, as far as that's concerned, but most of it was all matchstock.
And, for instance, when you were at Lardeau as the setter, you were sent there by Powell's?
Yes, I was sent up there.
And they would be cutting an order of white pine?
Oh no, they'd be cutting everything. But there was nothing else around, and Elmer would send me up there, and I sat on everything as far as that's concerned. And I'd usually stay there that was good, and then I'd come in and usually phone Elmer up, and he'd tell me what was going on or anything like that. I said, never any trouble getting work.
Who was Elmer?
Elmer Horton. Horton was the general manager down here. Elmer was the general manager down there. Harry Horton, his son, was kind of an assistant, and Logan was the office manager. Herb Logan, he was the office manager down there, and Nelson was the plant manager.
Were they all Americans up from Spokane?
Elmer Horton came from Spokane, yes, but Harry, I guess he came up as a baby, but he was here, and Nelson came up from the States, but they were here for years. Logan didn't. Logan was a Canadian here.
Did you ever see WW Powell?
Oh yes. Oh, I met them both. I met them up there last week. And, she used to come over quite often, and they'd come up and they'd watch the mill in operation, and usually could say hello to them and talk to them for a few minutes and everything like that. They were very nice, as far as I can remember.
Did they have operations elsewhere?
Now, I can't answer that question. I don't know. I don't think they did, to be honest and frank with you.
Do you know what connection they had with E.B. Eddy?
I think they sold out to E.B. Eddy. Now, I'm not sure on that, but I think they sold out to E.B. Eddy. That's what they did.
After you left?
That's right. Yeah. Because they ran for a long time after I left. They ran for quite a long time. Because they had quite a staff down at WW Powell. They must have had close on 40 girls working there. Around 40 girls working in there, cutting the match blocks.
Did you work in the mill there at all?
No, I did not.
But you must be familiar with
Oh, I was familiar with it. I was down there a lot, and I often went in there as far as that's concerned. And as I say, I knew Nelson, the chief of the mill down there, who looked after all that. I knew him very, very well. He lived down here, Fairview. And when I went down, I used to go in the office there and talk to Elmer and Harry and I kicked around a little bit together and talked to Herb Logan, and then I'd go into the mill and some of the other boys that were in there, talk to them, and you could see the girls working. They were all working at the back there, as I was concerned.
The logs that they cut there would have come in by water or by rail?
They didn't cut any logs there. All they cut there was the lumber that came in. No logs were cut there in WW Powell. Lumber came in. The 2 1/8 matchstock came in, and then it was resawed in there, and the blocks were dropped on a big table. The girls were on there, and they cut the knots out of the matchstock.
How did they do that?
They had little axes, little hatchets. Mm-hmm. They cut and the bad ones were slipped over the top. And a fellow named Andy Spears used to haul all this away and sell it. He used to sell it for $5 a load. He had a little truck. You could load a truckload. You get it for $5.
That would be all the knots.
All knots, yeah. The other went through. And,
so did they plane this lumber? Was it all planed?
Yeah, it was. It was planed and resawed, so that it was the 2 1/8 right the way through, as far as that's concerned, and all done.
Yeah. In different lengths. It's a block made.
Well, the blocks should be, maybe you got a block that size.
8, 10 inches.
It would be 2 1/8 inches. The way it would be. That was the main thing as far as that's concerned. Mm-hmm. But it's just a matter they cut them. Maybe get chunks that long, and they just cut the knots out of and throw them away, and the rest would go through and ready for shipment. Mm-hmm. And they were shipped that way back east.
What did Johnson produce there at that sawmill?
Johnson and the sawmill there. All he cut was lumber. That's straight lumber as far as that's concerned.
What was his market for the lumber?
Yes, he had a market for the lumber, and then of course he got a lot of white pine. A lot of white pine was he. Yeah.
Would they cut all sorts? Would Johnson cut cedar?
He cut cedar and very little hemlock cut those days. It was mostly fir, larch.
Do you know whether they were shipping to the prairies or whether they were shipping to the States?
I don't know. I couldn't answer that question at all. I just don't know where they would be. But I know that the lumber didn't stay around very long. So they must have been getting it out of it pretty fast, as far as that's concerned.
Did they sell rough green lumber, or did they have a kiln and a
No,
plane?
no, it was rough. It was rough. No, there were very few had kilns those days. In fact, I can't even remember when they did have one.
So there was Powell and Johnson, and then the shingle and box factory.
Western Box and Shingle Mills. Of course, they they didn't bother with pine at all. All they cut was just any fur or anything like that, just as long as it would make up into boxes. And that's what they were after. And then they, of course, had a little shingle mill on the side, and they were cutting shingles. In fact, they cut everything there. They cut shingles there, and the sawmill there, and the shingle mill on this side, and then in the middle there was the planer, and then there was the rip saws and the cut-off saws, everything. And
what was your job there when you worked there?
well, I worked again. I worked on the carriage on that for them, as far as that's concerned. And then I did saw for maybe for a few weeks. I sawed there, and then they sent me up to Grohman Creek to that mill up there, and that was a heck of a thing. And I sawed up there.
Why do you say it was a heck of a thing?
Well, it was ready to fall to pieces. Took more time trying to keep it going. Did cut in lumber.
So was it like the Lost Creek Mill?
Oh no. The Lost Creek Mill was, in those days, was an up-to-date mill, but some of these others weren't. I thought there was a lot of very good mills. In fact, funny, I've got a grandson right now who's got a little portable mill out at Salmo. He's cutting out there right now. And
so at Grohman Creek, they were logging with horses.
Oh yes.
And can you describe the operation there from sort of start to finish? How?
Well, all they did was just pull the logs down right to the mill. That's right. They would pull them right down to where you roll it on the deck onto the sawmill. And there was no setter or anything like that. It was just it's a one-man operation. That's all it was. So you roll it onto the carriage there and put the dog into it there and set it up and slip it through the saw. And the flume brought everything right down, dropped it out into the boom down at Grohman Creek.
So they were fluming the lumber out, down from there down.
That's right. Yeah.
What kind of mill was it? Do you know?
Oh gosh, I couldn't tell you right now.
Was it powered with a belt from a tractor?
Yeah, it was a little gas driven affair. That's what it was. Yeah.
So you had a lever for to control the cable?
setting, yeah. And you had for running the carriage. They had a carriage on there. Run the carriage back and forth. You had your lever for that, and you had a lever on the carriage to crank the log up what you wanted, as far as that's concerned. And,
what would a mill like that produce?
Gee, I have no idea right now. I couldn't tell you. I don't think any more than around 5,000. I don't think it would make me 5,000 in a day.
And once the logs the lumber had come down the chute or down the flume, they would land in the lake.
That's right.
Be enclosed in a boom.
That's right.
And then would they?
They'd just bring it right up to the mill here, down here.
Did they have a tugboat?
Hey, they had a boat. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes, it's really something.
How did you get up there? Was there a wagon road?
There's a wagon road going up there. I don't know whether it's been looked after or whether it is, but there is a wagon road going up there. It's a pretty rough road, but it was even then. Maybe even worse now, I don't know. That's a good many years ago.
Did that operate in the same seasonal?
Oh, it just always operated up there. I was up there just a few weeks. They had some logs up there they wanted to cut and bring it down, and that's all there was to it. And the old mill, hadn't been touched for a long time. No, I don't know, it must have taken a week to get the damn thing in, ready to run right. And I'm just trying to think of the fellow who went up with me to work on the engine. I can't think of his name now. He had a heck of a time. It's a good thing he went, because I never got it started. But there's a big difference, a big difference now, and you don't see very many of that. Although some of the smaller sawmills are starting to come back again right now, I believe. I got a grandson out there at Salmo's got a portable. It's quite a slick little mill, and he's cutting, and he can sure move it around. And I got another grandson up at Prince George who's designing portables.
Oh. Why were the mills prospering so in the 20s? What was the...
Well, I don't know. It as far as I'm concerned, the big sawmills spoilt. Spoilt the how should I put it? I don't know just how to put it. It just, when all the little sawmills were working, there was seemed to be jobs for everybody. And since these little sawmills all closed down, everything, the big saws, they haven't got half the people working. Mind you, we didn't get the money those days they're getting today either.
Were most of these little sawmills owned by a family and run by a family?
Well, some families had them. I don't know. I'm just trying to think. Well, the Kelly had a port out at Salmo there. They were just down below Lost Creek. Kelly, they ran for quite a few years. That was a family. That was a portable. They had a good run of things. Thorpe, that was a family affair at Violin Lake. Mm-hmm. That was Frank and his son. And who else around here? The only other one I know is Hushcroft's out at Arrow Creek.
Did you ever work cutting poles?
No, I never did. I never cut a pole.
There was a fair bit of pole cutting.
A lot of pole cutting. A lot of pole cutting at that time. Yeah, but I never cut a pole at all. But I worked with fellas who did cut poles, but I don't know. I never got into it as far as that's concerned. But they did all right. They did very well as far as that's concerned. All there was logging was a lot of logging. A lot of Erie had another place where they had, in fact, the Renwick boys from here, their grandfather did a lot of logging at Erie. Some of the finest horses you've ever seen used to log up in through there. Mm. Beautiful horses.
Where's Erie?
Erie, out on the other side of Salmo.
Right. Okay.
Just up in through there. And they had, and I'm just trying to figure out which sawmill they went to. And I can't think of it right now. See, Salmo was quite a busy place for shingle mills and sawmills. It used to be big. There was a big stretch of cedar in there, and they must have been half a dozen little shingle mills all working just on the south of Salmo down in through there, and cedars just like that. In fact, if you go down there now, you still the odd big cedar sitting there. You can see the odd big stump, but they were beauties. And they worked. A fellow who was very strong in there was the name of Archibald. He had 2 or 3 of those little mills in there, and so Sawmill really had. And they had another. They had 2. There was 2 mills between Weimar and Sawmill. 2 little mills there. And there was a small one too at Erie. Oh gee, they were all over. They were just all over.
There were some large mills as well, weren't there?
Well, there was the one at Sheep Creek. Yes, that was Rotter. That was quite a good sized mill. But that came in quite a lot out later.
How much later?
10 or 15 years later, I would say. Something like that.
During the Second World War?
Yes, around about there. I would say that when they came in there, somewhere in there. Yeah, and that's the first one of the kilns I see. They had a kiln out there, and that's the first time I seen a kiln in operation was when they was on that one there. But I don't know. There wasn't too many big mills down that way. Not what you'd call big. Of course, those days a big mill was anything that turned out 50,000 was quite a good sized mill.
What about manufacturing with wood products here in Nelson? Was there a sash and door factory here when you in the 20s?
No. No.
Did it closed?
Yes. The only one thing here that I can remember that T.H. Waters went in for some of this stuff. He made clothespins here for a while, and that died by the wayside. And of course the veneer factory, that worked for a few years, and then that went. And whether they couldn't get the logs they wanted or what, I don't know. I don't know what happened on that at all.
That was cottonwood veneer?
Yeah, it was cottonwood veneer. Yeah, that's what it was. It was cottonwood. And Johnson, I think Johnson ran out of logs. That's why they didn't have the logs. Couldn't get the logs or something. That's what happened there. I may be wrong on that, but I have a sneaking hunch back in my mind that that's what happened. And that's where Russ Fletcher worked quite a lot for Johnson. Mm-hmm. He worked there on the boom down there. But I don't know. Those are the biggest mills that I know of. Is that one down of Johnson would turn out about 40,000 a day. The Lardeau one would turn out between 45 and 55,000. Lost Creek would turn out between 45 and 55,000.
Where did the timber come for the Lardeau mill?
Up towards Marble Headway. Up through there.
And was it brought down? How was it brought down?
Well, they tried to use the river. It didn't work too good.
Why are you laughing?
Jammed up. They couldn't reach the jams. But I don't think there was a river was fast enough and deep enough and wide enough to bring the logs down. They had quite a lot of trouble. But oh yeah, then Waldie's. Then of course there was Waldie at Castlegar. I mustn't forget them. Now that was the biggest one around here.
Mm-hmm.
That was the biggest around here. Was Waldie.
And that was called Edgewood.
Was it? I can't remember. It could have been, but that was the biggest mill.
Did you get up to Nakusp and?
No, I never got
Arrowhead?
up there. I never got up there as far as that's concerned at all. No, but
what did you like about working as a setter?
I found it interesting. I found it interesting the different the different logs and grading the logs. You graded them on the you graded them on the carriage. As far as that's concerned, today they grade them on the trimmers. We used to grade the logs on the carriage.
And how did that work?
Well, it worked out good. You know, I mean, say you knew what you were. Say, of course, today in these bigger mills, well, they just haven't got time to do any grading on that. We had the time to do that. You know, the first cut would give you an idea what the log was going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
So all you need is that first cut, and you look along, and you can see the grain is good, and it looks everything. Right, we're going to take some 5/4 out of there. So you take some 5/4 out of there, you see, and all good. It's all clear.
When you were cutting, and you put the log onto the carriage, and you started taking the slabs off. Normally, you didn't cant the log. You didn't cut it into a square timber and then.
No, you used to cut it to about halfway,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd flip it right up against the dogs again. Then you'd take another slab off, and
So that's why the edger was so important.
That's
because everything coming off the head saw had wane on it.
that's right.
Uh-huh.
That's exactly right. And then of course if you took the one cant off and then put it down on the flat, then the edgeman just had the one side to edge, that's all. So he'd stick it over against his straight edge on the side of the edge, and away we go. That's all there is to it. And of course now up in excuse me, at Lost Creek, they had a fellow who used to tail the big saw for the edgeman. He'd pull the plank off when it dropped and move over to the edgeman to take it. Did the same thing at Lardeau. So there was a helper there all the way through. And of course, when the last came off, you had two to come down. You know.
Right. What would go wrong with the mills? What was the thing that would break down with them?
Well, sometimes the cable would slip on the carriage.
Mm-hmm.
That was one thing you had to watch. I never had a carriage jump the track or so that I can remember. We had a cable that give it trouble, and then of course you had to watch your saws so that you didn't get there was no wiggle in the saw or anything like that. It was there, and they had to keep the saw sharp.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd cut for so long, and then they'd stop, and then the teeth were taken out and new teeth put in
Mm-hmm.
where it was necessary, and then they go ahead and cut some more as far as that's concerned.
And the teeth would be taken off and sharpened and.
No, they throw them away, put new teeth in.
Uh-huh.
Put new teeth in. They just slip in there like slick as a whistle.
Mm-hmm.
But then once they're there, they're no good anymore. You can't do anything with them. You see? But now on a rip saw, then you can take the rip saw off, and they put that on, and it's sharpened something like a handsaw.
Mm-hmm. Filed.
Yeah.
How often would they have to stop?
Well, usually on there, unless of course you got into real dirty logs, and they were used to watch it pretty close that we on that, and you'd start. We say we started at 7 o'clock in the morning. About 9:30 we'd stop, and they'd sometimes they'll file those teeth on the saw themselves. Then they'll run it again to do, then through the lunch hour they're filed again, and then halfway through the afternoon it's filed again. You see, now they may last. Some of those teeth may last a week.
Who filed the saw? The sawyer?
Usually the sawyer. Usually the sawyer. Sometimes some of them had a filer. They had a filer up there at Lardeau. But Fred Dory used to file his own saws. He was fussy. Very fussy. But he was a good filer too. It's nice to have a sharp saw, because boy, they can, it's so much easier. It goes through, and you get a dull saw, it just starts to tear. Mm-hmm. And so it's. But I think that's about all I can tell you.